The crumpled dollar bill hit the gravel parking lot like a slap across the face. Emma Claire watched through tear-blurred eyes as the taillights of the black pickup truck disappeared into the Montana darkness, carrying away the man who had promised to love her forever. At 19, 6 months pregnant, and holding everything she owned in a plastic grocery bag, she had just been sold for the price of a candy bar. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The truck stop restroom mirror showed her what Brandon had grown tired of looking at. Her blonde hair hung in greasy strands around a face swollen from crying and poor nutrition. The oversized t-shirt she wore barely concealed her growing belly, and her jeans were held together with safety pins where the zipper could no longer close. Dark circles under her green eyes told the story of sleepless nights spent worrying about a future that seemed to grow bleaker by the day. Emma picked up the dollar bill from the parking lot asphalt, her hands shaking not from the October cold, but from the shock of how completely her world had collapsed in a single evening. 6 hours ago, she had been Brandon Tyler's girlfriend, living in their cramped apartment in Billings, planning for their baby's arrival despite his increasingly obvious reluctance about fatherhood. Now she was homeless, penniless, and utterly alone. The truck stop bathroom became her refuge as she tried to process what had just happened. Brandon had taken her for what she thought was a romantic dinner to discuss their future. Instead, he had driven her 2 hours north to this isolated rest stop on Highway 89, handed her $1, and told her to find her own way from here. "I never wanted this baby, Emma." His words echoed in her memory with brutal clarity. "I never wanted any of this responsibility. You can keep the kid or not, but I'm done pretending I'm ready to be a father. Here's $1 for the phone. Call someone who cares." The truck stop payphone mocked her with its demand for quarters when all she had was Brandon's cruel dollar bill. Even if she could make change, who would she call? Her parents had disowned her when she refused to handle the situation as her father had euphemistically suggested. Her few friends in Billings had gradually drifted away as her pregnancy advanced and her relationship with Brandon became increasingly strained. Emma splashed cold water on her face and tried to think rationally about her options. The truck stop was surrounded by wilderness, miles from the nearest town, with no bus service and no way to call for help. She had no money for food, no place to sleep, and winter was approaching in the Montana mountains, where temperatures could drop below freezing even in early fall. Outside, the truck stop's fluorescent lights attracted clouds of moths, while 18-wheelers rumbled past on their way to destinations that might as well have been on different planets. Emma watched through the window as drivers filled their tanks, bought coffee and snacks, and continued their journeys with the casual confidence of people who knew where they were going and how they would get there. She tried approaching several drivers, explaining her situation and asking for a ride to Billings or any town with a bus station. The responses ranged from sympathetic rejection to crude suggestions that made her stomach turn. One elderly driver offered her $20 to earn her way, and when she refused, he called her ungrateful and drove away, muttering about women who expected charity. As midnight approached, the truck stop grew quieter, leaving Emma increasingly visible and vulnerable. The night manager, a woman in her 50s, with tired eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, finally approached her as she sat on a bench outside the building. "Honey, you can't stay here all night," the woman said, not unkindly, but firmly. "This isn't a shelter, and I've got to think about the safety of my customers and my business." "I don't have anywhere else to go," Emma admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was hoping someone might give me a ride to town." The manager, whose name tag read Dolores, studied Emma's obvious pregnancy and desperate circumstances with the practiced eye of someone who had seen plenty of human misery during her years at the truck stop. How far along are you? 6 months. And the father? Emma's silence was answer enough. Dolores sighed heavily, the sound carrying years of witnessing the consequences of poor decisions and cruel circumstances. Listen, I can let you sleep in the employees' break room tonight, but you'll have to be gone before the morning shift starts at 6. Beyond that, I can't help you. I'm sorry. The break room was a windowless space with a scarred table, 2 plastic chairs, and a microwave that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in months. But it was warm and private, and Emma was grateful for even this temporary refuge. She used her jacket as a pillow and tried to sleep on the floor, but her growing belly made comfortable positioning impossible, and worry about tomorrow kept her mind racing through increasingly desperate scenarios. She must have dozed fitfully because she was awakened by voices outside the break room door. Through the thin walls, she could hear Dolores talking to someone in the main area of the truck. Stop, she's just a kid, barely 20, pregnant and alone. Boyfriend dumped her here with nothing but a dollar bill. I've seen a lot of sad cases over the years, but this one's got me worried. Where's she planning to go? The second voice was male, deep and measured, with the careful diction of someone who chose his words thoughtfully. Doesn't seem to have a plan. No family, no money, no way to get anywhere, even if she had somewhere to go. I let her sleep in the break room, but I can't do more than that without risking my job. Emma pressed her ear closer to the door, curious about the stranger who seemed concerned about her situation. Most people at truck stops minded their own business, focused on getting back on the road as quickly as possible. What's your sense of her character? The man asked. Is she someone who's gotten into trouble through poor choices, or someone who's been dealt a bad hand? Hard to say for certain, but my gut tells me she's more victim than troublemaker. She's been polite and grateful for what little help I could offer. Didn't try to steal anything or cause problems, just scared and alone. There was a pause in the conversation. Then Dolores continued. Why do you ask? You're not usually interested in the personal problems of stranded travelers. Maybe it's time I was. Emma heard footsteps moving away from the break room, then the sound of the truck stop's front door opening and closing. She remained pressed against the door, wondering about the mysterious stranger who had taken interest in her plight. Most likely he was just another traveler who would forget about her situation as soon as he returned to his own life. When dawn began filtering through the crack under the break room door, Emma gathered her few possessions and prepared to face whatever came next. She had no destination in mind, no plan beyond finding somewhere warmer than the parking lot to spend the day. Her stomach cramped with hunger, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since lunch the previous day, and the baby needed nutrition, even if she could ignore her own needs. Dolores was waiting for her with a cup of coffee and a wrapped sandwich from the truck stop's limited food selection. It's not much, but it'll give you some energy, she said, pressing both items into Emma's hands. I wish I could do more. You've already done more than you had to, Emma replied, genuinely grateful for the woman's kindness. Thank you for giving me a safe place to sleep. As Emma prepared to leave the truck stop, uncertain where she would go or what she would do, Dolores called after her. There's a man outside who wants to talk to you. Says he might be able to help. Emma's stomach tightened with suspicion. Her recent experiences had taught her to be wary of men who offered help to vulnerable women. Too often, such offers came with conditions that were worse than the original problem, but desperation had a way of overruling caution. She stepped outside into the crisp mountain morning to find a man leaning against a weathered blue pickup truck, drinking coffee from a thermos. He was older than Brandon, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of deep tan that came from years of outdoor work. His dark brown hair was longer than fashionable, but clean and well kept, and his clothes suggested someone who worked with his hands, but took care of his appearance. What struck Emma most were his eyes. They were an unusual shade of amber, and when he looked at her, she didn't see the judgment or calculation she had grown accustomed to from men. Instead, there was something that looked almost like compassion. "Miss," he said, touching the brim of his worn baseball cap in a gesture that seemed both old-fashioned and sincere. "My name is Marcus Stone. Dolores mentioned you might be in need of assistance." Emma clutched her plastic bag tighter, every instinct telling her to be cautious. "What kind of assistance?" "The kind that doesn't come with strings attached," Marcus replied, as if he could read her thoughts. "I have a place up in the mountains where you could stay while you figure out your next steps. Clean bed, good food, complete safety." The offer was so unexpected that Emma wondered if she had misheard. Why would you help a complete stranger? Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying her face with those unusual amber eyes. "Because everyone deserves better than being abandoned at a truck stop in the middle of nowhere. And because I have more space than I need, and no good reason not to share it. I don't have any money to pay you. I'm not asking for money." Emma's defensive walls went up immediately. She had learned that when men said they didn't want money, they usually wanted something else that was far more costly. "Then what are you asking for?" "Nothing, at least not right now. You need help. I'm in a position to provide it. Sometimes life is that simple." Marcus finished his coffee and screwed the cap back onto his thermos with deliberate movements that suggested he was giving her time to process his offer. "I'm not going to pressure you for an answer, but if you decide you'd like to take me up on it, I'll be here for another hour getting my truck serviced." He started toward the truck stop building, then paused and turned back. "For what it's worth, I live alone on 40 acres, about an hour north of here. No neighbors for miles, nobody to bother you or ask questions you don't want to answer. Complete peace and quiet while you decide what you want to do next." As Marcus disappeared into the truck stop, Emma found herself staring at his pickup truck and trying to make sense of what had just happened. In her experience, men who offered help to pregnant women usually had ulterior motives. But something about Marcus Stone seemed different from the predators she had learned to recognize. His manner had been respectful without being patronizing. His offer of help came without immediate demands or conditions. And Dolores, who had proven to be a good judge of character, had apparently trusted him enough to mention Emma's situation. Emma walked around the parking lot, using the movement to help her think more clearly. The alternative to accepting Marcus's help was immediate homelessness with winter approaching. She could try hitchhiking back to Billings, but she had no money for food or shelter once she got there, and her former apartment was now beyond her financial reach, even if Brandon hadn't already changed the locks. She could attempt to find a women's shelter, but most required residency verification or other documentation she didn't possess. The social services system was notoriously overwhelmed and underfunded, especially in rural Montana, where resources were spread thin across vast distances. As Emma weighed her limited options, she watched Marcus through the truck stop window as he paid for his fuel and chatted briefly with Dolores. His body language was relaxed and open, without the aggressive posturing she had learned to associate with men who had something to hide. When Dolores laughed at something he said, Emma realized that the truck stop manager knew and trusted this stranger who had offered to help her. Marcus emerged from the building, carrying a small bag of supplies, and approached his truck without looking in Emma's direction. He was giving her space to make her decision without pressure, another point in his favor. Most men who wanted something from her would have been hovering, pushing for an immediate answer, using her desperation as leverage. "Mr. Stone," Emma called, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. He turned, his expression neutral but attentive. "Yes, miss? If I came with you, what would be expected of me?" "Expected?" "Nothing. You'd be a guest while you get back. On your feet, help around the place if you felt like it, but only if you wanted to." Emma studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda. "And when I decide to leave, I'd drive you wherever you wanted to go or help you arrange transportation if it was too far for my truck." The simplicity of his answers was either the mark of genuine honesty or sophisticated manipulation. Emma had learned to distrust easy solutions to difficult problems, but she had also learned that sometimes the most dangerous choice was refusing to take any risks at all. "Mr. Stone, I should tell you that I'm pregnant," I noticed, "and I don't know anything about you beyond your name, and the fact that Dolores seems to trust you. That's probably smart. Trust should be earned, not given freely." Marcus leaned against his truck, apparently content to continue the conversation as long as necessary. "If it helps, I can give you references. Pastor Williams at the community church in Glacier Falls knows me. So does Dr. Sarah Martinez at the medical clinic there. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly." The mention of a doctor caught Emma's attention. She hadn't had prenatal care since losing her health insurance when Brandon's employer had cut her from his policy. The baby deserved better than a mother who was too proud or too scared to accept help when it was offered. "Where exactly is your place?" "About 60 miles north, up in the Glacier National Forest area. I have a cabin on private land that borders the Forest Service property. It's isolated, but it's comfortable and completely secure. Isolated could mean safety, or it could mean vulnerability." Emma had to decide whether Marcus Stone represented rescue or a different kind of danger. But as she looked around the truck stop parking lot at her current alternatives, the choice became clearer. She had been abandoned with nothing. Any change in her circumstances would be an improvement, and Marcus's offer was the only one she had received that didn't come with obvious strings attached. "All right, Mr. Stone, I'll accept your help." Marcus nodded as if her decision was both expected and reasonable. "Good. Let me get my truck, and we'll head up to the cabin." As Emma climbed into the passenger seat of Marcus's pickup truck, she noticed details that told her more about the man who had just offered her sanctuary. The truck was older but meticulously maintained, with no trash or clutter in the cab. A well-worn Bible sat on the dashboard alongside a pair of work gloves, and a small notebook filled with what appeared to be careful handwriting. The radio was tuned to a classical music station, playing something peaceful and complex that seemed at odds with the rugged mountain setting. When Marcus noticed her attention to the music, he smiled slightly. "Bach, the Brandenburg Concertos. Most people expect country music or classic rock, but I find classical helps me think more clearly." This small revelation intrigued Emma. Marcus Stone was already proving to be more complex than his simple offer of help had suggested. As they left the truck stop behind and headed north on increasingly winding mountain roads, Emma found herself studying her rescuer's profile in the dashboard lights. His hands on the steering wheel were calloused and scarred from manual labor, but his movements were precise and confident. He drove with the careful attention of someone who respected both his vehicle and the dangerous mountain roads they were traveling. When he spoke, his voice carried a slight southern accent that suggested origins far from Montana. "Have you lived in Montana long?" Emma asked, partly from curiosity and partly to fill the silence that had grown between them. "About 3 years. I came north from Texas after my discharge from the Army." "What did you do in the Army?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Emma wondered if he would answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried undertones that suggested difficult memories, special forces, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. "I was a medic mostly, but we did a lot of different jobs, depending on what was needed." This explained the careful way he moved and spoke, the sense that he was constantly aware of his surroundings. Emma had known other veterans who carried themselves with that same alert watchfulness, men who had seen too much violence and learned to expect trouble even in peaceful settings. "Is that why you live alone in the mountains? To get away from people?" "Partly, also because I like the quiet, and I needed time to figure out who I was going to be now that I wasn't a soldier anymore." The honesty in his answer surprised Emma. Most men she knew were reluctant to admit to any kind of uncertainty or emotional complexity. Marcus seemed comfortable acknowledging that his life had required rebuilding after his military service. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the landscape became increasingly dramatic. Towering pines lined the narrow road, and Emma caught glimpses of snow-capped peaks in the moonlight. The isolation that had seemed threatening when Marcus first described it began to feel more like protection from a world that had proven itself capable of infinite cruelty. "How much farther?" she asked as they turned onto a dirt road that seemed to lead directly into the wilderness. "About 10 more minutes. The cabin is back in a valley where you can't see it from the main road. Complete privacy." Emma realized that she was committing herself to isolation with a man she had known for less than 2 hours. If Marcus had malicious intentions, no one would hear her scream for help. But something in his calm, respectful manner continued to suggest that her instincts about his character were correct. The cabin, when it finally came into view, was far more substantial than Emma had expected. It wasn't the rough shelter she had imagined, but a well-built log structure with a stone foundation and a metal roof that gleamed in the moonlight. Solar panels were visible on the south-facing slope of the roof, and she could see the glow of electric lights through curtained windows. A covered porch wrapped around 2 sides of the building, and several outbuildings were arranged around a central yard with the orderly precision of someone who valued both function and aesthetics. A generator hummed quietly in one of the smaller buildings, and Emma could see a large garden area that had been carefully prepared for winter. "You built all this yourself?" she asked as Marcus parked the truck near the main cabin. "Most of it. I had help with the electrical and plumbing, but the construction was something I needed to do with my own hands." Marcus climbed out of the truck and came around to help Emma down, offering his arm for support without making her feel helpless. His consideration for her condition was careful and respectful, without the awkward hovering she had experienced from some people who seemed to think pregnancy was a form of disability. "Come inside and I'll show you around," he said, carrying her bag despite her protests that she could manage it herself. "Then you can get some real rest." The interior of the cabin was both rustic and sophisticated, with exposed log walls and modern amenities that created an atmosphere of comfortable wilderness living. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, surrounded by handcrafted furniture that showed both skill and artistic sensibility. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with an eclectic mix of literature, history, and technical manuals. The kitchen was compact but well-designed, with quality appliances and enough space for serious cooking. Emma noticed copper pots hanging from hooks above a butcher block island, and the pantry appeared to be well-stocked with both staples and more sophisticated ingredients. "You cook?" she asked, noting details that suggested someone who took food seriously. "I had to learn when I realized I was going to be living alone. Turns out I have a talent for it." Marcus showed her to a bedroom that was clearly intended for guests, with its own bathroom and a window that looked out over the forested valley. The bed was made with military precision, and clean towels were folded neatly on the dresser. "This is beautiful," Emma said, running her hand over a quilt that had obviously been made by skilled hands. "Did you make this?" "My grandmother. She passed away a few years ago and left me most of her handiwork. I like having reminders of her around the place." The mention of his grandmother added another layer to Emma's understanding of Marcus Stone. A man who treasured his grandmother's quilts and surrounded himself with classical music was unlikely to be the kind of predator she had been taught to fear. "Mr. Stone," Emma said as he prepared to leave her to settle in, "why are you helping me? Really?" Marcus paused in the doorway, considering her question with the same careful thought he seemed to bring to everything else. Because I know what it's like to be abandoned when you need help most, and because I believe that how we treat people who can't help us in return says something important about who we are as human beings. After Marcus left her alone in the guest room, Emma allowed herself to truly absorb what had happened. In the space of 12 hours, she had gone from being abandoned at a truck stop to being welcomed into a home that felt more secure and comfortable than anywhere she had lived in months. But more importantly, she had encountered someone who seemed to see her as a person deserving of respect and assistance, rather than as a burden or an opportunity for exploitation. For the first time since learning she was pregnant, Emma allowed herself to hope that her future might hold more than mere survival. As she settled into the comfortable bed and listened to the sounds of the Montana wilderness outside her window, Emma realized that Marcus Stone had already given her something more valuable than shelter and food. He had given her back her sense of human dignity. Whether this sanctuary would prove to be temporary or something more permanent remained to be seen. But for tonight, Emma was safe, warm, and treated with the kind of respect she had almost forgotten she deserved. The woman who had been abandoned for $1 was beginning to remember what it felt like to be valued. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma woke to the smell of bacon and fresh coffee drifting through the cabin, accompanied by the distant sound of someone moving efficiently around the kitchen. For a moment, she lay still in the comfortable bed, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings and the absence of the constant worry that had plagued her sleep for months. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the warm air. Outside, she could hear birds singing and the gentle whisper of wind through pine trees. It was the most peaceful morning she could remember experiencing since before her father had thrown her out of the family home in disgrace. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, Emma found Marcus standing at the kitchen stove, tending to what appeared to be a substantial breakfast. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days, but his movements around the kitchen were confident and practiced. "Good morning," he said without turning around. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks." Emma approached the kitchen island cautiously, still uncertain about the boundaries of her welcome here. "You didn't have to make breakfast. I was cooking anyway, and breakfast is better with company." Marcus turned to face her, and Emma was struck again by those unusual amber eyes that seemed to see everything without judging what they found. "How are you feeling this morning? Any morning sickness or other discomfort?" The casual way he acknowledged her pregnancy, without embarrassment or awkwardness, surprised Emma. Most people either ignored her condition entirely or treated it like a shameful secret that shouldn't be mentioned in polite conversation. "I'm fine. The baby's been fairly easy on me considering everything." Marcus nodded and returned his attention to the stove. "That's good. Stress isn't ideal for pregnancy, from what I understand." Emma studied the kitchen more carefully in daylight, noting details she had missed the night before. The copper pots weren't just decorative, they showed signs of regular use and proper care. Dried herbs hung in bundles near the window, and the spice rack contained varieties she hadn't seen since her mother's kitchen back when her family life had been stable and loving. "You really do cook," she observed. "I really do. Turns out I enjoy it more than I expected when I first had to learn out of necessity." Marcus plated scrambled eggs, bacon, and hash browns with the presentation skills of someone who took pride in his work. He poured fresh orange juice and coffee, then gestured for Emma to sit at the small table that overlooked the forest through a large window. "This is incredible," Emma said after tasting the eggs, which were perfectly seasoned and cooked to ideal consistency. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Trial and error mostly, also some online tutorials and a few cookbooks. When you're living alone and tired of eating poorly prepared food, you get motivated to improve. As they ate, Marcus asked gentle questions about Emma's background and circumstances, listening carefully to her answers without pushing for details she seemed reluctant to share. His questions focused on practical matters rather than personal drama, treating her situation as a problem to be solved rather than entertainment to be consumed. "Do you have any medical concerns about the pregnancy that need immediate attention?" he asked as they finished eating. Emma hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach with someone who was offering genuine help. "I haven't had prenatal care in about 6 weeks. My insurance was cancelled when my boyfriend decided he didn't want to be responsible for me anymore." Marcus's expression darkened slightly, though his anger seemed directed at Brandon rather than at Emma. "Dr. Martinez in Glacier Falls is excellent, and she has experience with complicated situations. I could drive you there this afternoon if you'd like to get checked up." "I don't have money for a doctor visit. Dr. Martinez and I have an arrangement. I do maintenance work on her clinic in exchange for medical services when needed. She'd see you as a favor to me." The casual way Marcus offered to trade his labor for Emma's medical care struck her as both generous and practical. He wasn't offering charity that would make her feel indebted, but rather presenting it as a simple exchange of services that benefited everyone involved. After breakfast, Marcus gave Emma a more thorough tour of his property. The 40 acres included not just the main cabin, but also a workshop, a greenhouse, a small barn with chickens and goats, and a garden area that had been carefully prepared for winter storage of root vegetables. "You're completely self-sufficient," Emma observed as they walked past raised beds covered with protective cloth and a root cellar built into a hillside. "That was the goal. I wanted to create a place where I could live independently without relying on systems that might fail or disappoint." The workshop revealed more about Marcus's skills and interests. Hand tools hung in organized precision along the walls, and several pieces of furniture in various stages of completion suggested he made much of what he needed rather than purchasing it. A workbench held a partially carved wooden cradle that made Emma's breath catch. "Were you making that for someone specific?" she asked, approaching the beautiful piece of craftsmanship. Marcus followed her gaze to the cradle, his expression unreadable. "I started it as a practice project, learning woodworking techniques, but I suppose it could serve a more practical purpose if needed." The implication hung in the air between them. Marcus had been working on a baby cradle without apparent need. For one, almost as if he had been preparing for the possibility of a child in his life. Emma wondered if his offer to help her had been as spontaneous as it had seemed, or whether some deeper instinct had been guiding his actions. "Mr. Stone," Emma said as they continued exploring the property, "I need to ask you something directly, and I hope you'll give me an honest answer." "Of course. Do you make a habit of rescuing pregnant women from truck stops?" Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "No. You're the first person I've offered to help in the 3 years I've lived here." "Then why me? What made you decide to get involved when you've apparently been content to live alone and mind your own business?" Marcus was quiet for several minutes, seeming to struggle with how to explain his motivations. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability that Emma hadn't heard before. "Because I know what it's like to be abandoned by people who were supposed to care about you. And because I've been wondering lately if isolation is really the solution to life's problems, or just another kind of prison." The honesty in his answer resonated with something deep in Emma's chest. She recognized the carefully controlled pain in his voice, the same emotion she had been carrying since Brandon's betrayal. Marcus Stone wasn't just offering her sanctuary. He was admitting that he needed something from this arrangement as well, even if he couldn't articulate exactly what that was. "What happened to you?" Emma asked gently. Who abandoned you when you needed help? My unit, Marcus said after a long pause. Not officially, but when I came back from my last deployment with what the doctors called severe PTSD, suddenly everyone was too busy to maintain friendships. The brotherhood that was supposed to last forever disappeared the moment I became inconvenient. Emma understood abandonment intimately, though her experience had been personal rather than military. Is that why you left Texas? I left because staying meant being surrounded by reminders of relationships that had failed and expectations I couldn't meet. Coming here gave me space to heal without constantly being reminded of who I used to be. As they walked back toward the cabin, Emma found herself studying Marcus with new understanding. His offer to help her wasn't just generosity, it was recognition of shared experience with rejection and isolation. Two people who had been deemed inconvenient by those who should have supported them had found each other in circumstances that neither could have predicted. Marcus, Emma said, using his first name for the first time, I should tell you more about my situation so you know what you're getting into. Only if you want to. I'm not going to pry into your private business. Emma appreciated his restraint, but she felt he deserved to understand the full scope of what helping her might entail. As they settled on the cabin's front porch with fresh coffee, she told him about her relationship with Brandon, the pregnancy that had seemed like a blessing, until it became a source of conflict and the gradual deterioration of her support system. My parents are religious people who believe that pregnancy outside marriage is a sin that reflects poor character, she explained, watching Marcus's face for signs of similar judgment. When I refused to get an abortion or give the baby up for adoption, they told me I was no longer welcome in their home. What about the father's family? Brandon never told them about the pregnancy. He was planning to break up with me anyway, according to what he said last night. The baby just gave him an excuse to do it more dramatically. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly grim as Emma described the systematic erosion of her security and support. When she finished, he was quiet for several minutes, apparently processing everything she had shared. Emma, he said finally, I want you to understand something. What happened to you isn't your fault. People who abandon others in their time of greatest need are revealing their own character, not making judgments about yours. The simple statement hit Emma harder than she had expected. For months, she had been carrying the weight of other people's disapproval, wondering if she had somehow deserved the rejection and abandonment she had experienced. To hear someone state clearly that the fault lay with those who had failed her, rather than with her own choices, was profoundly liberating. Do you really believe that? I know it. I've seen enough of human nature to recognize the difference between people who rise to meet challenges and people who run away from responsibility. Marcus stood and moved to the porch railing, looking out over his carefully maintained property. The question now is, what you want to do next. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need to, but I imagine you have thoughts about your future beyond just getting through the immediate crisis. Emma realized that she hadn't allowed herself to think beyond survival in weeks. The pregnancy had become such a source of conflict and stress that she had stopped planning for anything beyond getting through each day. Marcus's question forced her to confront the larger questions about what kind of life she wanted to build for herself and her child. I used to think I wanted to go to college, she said slowly. I was accepted to the University of Montana with a partial scholarship, but I deferred enrollment when I found out I was pregnant. Brandon convinced me that trying to manage school and a baby would be impossible. What were you planning to study? Elementary education? I wanted to be a teacher. Emma felt a familiar pang of loss as she spoke about dreams that seemed impossibly distant now. I love working with children, and I thought I could make a real difference in their lives. Why couldn't you still do that?" Emma stared at Marcus, wondering if he was serious. "Because I'm going to be a single mother with no money, no support system, and a baby to care for. College isn't exactly practical under those circumstances. Maybe not immediately, but it doesn't have to be impossible forever." Marcus returned to his chair, leaning forward with the intensity of someone who had given this considerable thought. "There are programs for single mothers who want to continue their education. Distance learning options, childcare assistance, financial aid specifically designed for people in your situation. You've researched this?" "I researched a lot of things during my first year here. Part of figuring out how to rebuild a life is understanding what options actually exist versus what options you think you have." Emma felt a flutter of something that might have been hope, stirring in her chest. For so long, her pregnancy had seemed like the end of her dreams, rather than a complication that could be managed. Marcus was suggesting that motherhood and education might not be mutually exclusive. "Even if such programs exist, I'd need somewhere stable to live, reliable childcare, and enough income to cover basic expenses. Those aren't small hurdles." "No, they're not. But they're not insurmountable either, especially if you have help and support while you're getting established." Marcus paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Emma, I want to make you an offer, but I need you to understand that it comes with no pressure and no expectations beyond what I'm explicitly stating." Emma's stomach tightened with familiar wariness. "What kind of offer?" "Stay here while you have the baby and get back on your feet. Use this as your base while you explore educational options and make plans for your future. I have space, I have resources, and I could use the company." "In exchange for what?" "Companionship, conversation, help with the property if you're interested and able. Nothing that would interfere with your own goals or well-being." Emma studied Marcus's face, looking for signs of hidden agendas or unspoken expectations. "You're talking about months, possibly over a year. That's a significant commitment to make to someone you just met." "It is, but I'm not making it lightly." Marcus stood and walked to the edge of the porch, where he could look out over the valley that surrounded his property. "I've been living alone for 3 years, telling myself that isolation was healing, but meeting you last night made me realize that maybe what I really need is the chance to be useful to someone again." "Useful how?" "I was a medic in the army. My job was taking care of people who needed help. Since coming here, I've been focused entirely on taking care of myself, and I think that's made me smaller as a person." Emma began to understand that Marcus's offer was motivated by his own needs as much as by her circumstances. He wasn't just offering charity, he was proposing an arrangement that might benefit them both in ways that neither could achieve alone. "What would this arrangement look like practically?" she asked. "You'd have complete privacy and autonomy, your own space, your own schedule, your own decisions about everything that affects you and the baby. I'd provide housing, food, transportation when needed, and support for whatever educational or career goals you want to pursue. And in return, friendship if it develops naturally. Help with projects around the property if you're interested. Company during meals and conversation in the evenings if you enjoy that." Marcus turned back to face her. "Emma, I'm not looking for a romantic relationship or anything physical. I'm looking for the kind of partnership where two people help each other become better versions of themselves." The offer was both generous and unusual, requiring Emma to reconsider her assumptions about what men wanted from women in vulnerable positions. Marcus seemed to be proposing genuine collaboration rather than exploitation disguised as assistance. "Why should I trust you?" Emma asked directly. "I've learned that people who offer help usually want something in return that they're not immediately admitting. Because I'm telling you exactly what I want, and I'm willing to put it in writing if that would make you more comfortable." Marcus's response was immediate and certain. I want companionship without romantic pressure. I want the chance to help someone build a better life, and I want to find out if I can be part of something meaningful again. Emma appreciated his directness, even though it raised new questions about what kind of man would be satisfied with such an arrangement. In her experience, men were primarily motivated by physical desires or the need to control women through financial dependency. Marcus seemed to be motivated by something entirely different. What happens if this arrangement doesn't work out? What if we find we can't live together comfortably? Then we figure out alternatives that work better for both of us. I'm not trying to trap you here or make you dependent on me. The goal is to give you options, not take them away. As they talked, Emma began to understand that Marcus's proposal was fundamentally different from anything she had experienced before. Rather than asking her to sacrifice her autonomy for security, he was offering to support her independence. Instead of making her smaller to fit into his life, he was suggesting they could both become larger through collaboration. I'd like to accept your offer, Emma said finally, at least on a trial basis to see how it works for both of us. What would make you feel most comfortable about the arrangement? Emma considered the question seriously. Clear boundaries and honest communication. If either of us becomes uncomfortable with any aspect of the living situation, we need to be able to discuss it openly. Agreed. What else? I'd like to contribute something meaningful, not just be a charity case. If I'm going to stay here for months, I want to be genuinely helpful rather than just a burden you're supporting out of kindness. Marcus smiled, and the expression transformed his serious features in a way that made Emma's heart skip unexpectedly. I can think of dozens of projects where your help would be valuable. The question is finding things that interest you and match your abilities. What kind of projects? The greenhouse needs better organization for winter growing. I've been wanting to expand the garden area, but haven't had time to plan it properly. The chickens and goats require daily care that takes me away from other work. Marcus paused, seeming to consider whether to mention something else. Also, I've been thinking about writing a book about sustainable living techniques, but I'm better at doing things than explaining them clearly. If you're interested in writing or editing, that might be something we could work on together. The mention of writing caught Emma's attention immediately. She had always loved words and had been editor of her high school newspaper before pregnancy. Had derailed her college plans. What kind of book? A practical guide for people who want to live more independently. How to grow your own food, preserve it for winter, generate your own power, maintain equipment, basic veterinary care for livestock, the kind of information that could help people become more self-sufficient. Emma felt excitement stirring for the first time in months. The project Marcus described sounded both challenging and meaningful, exactly the kind of intellectual engagement she had been missing since her life had become focused entirely on survival. I'd be very interested in helping with that, she said. I have experience with writing and research, and I learn quickly. Then that's settled. We'll start working on it once you're settled in and comfortable with the daily routine here. After breakfast, Marcus showed Emma the practical aspects of life at the cabin. The solar power system that provided electricity, the well that supplied fresh water, the propane system that fueled the stove and hot water heater. Everything was designed for independence and reliability, with backup systems for critical functions. Living off-grid requires different thinking than most people are used to, Marcus explained, as they examined the battery bank that stored solar power for use during cloudy days and nights. You have to be more conscious of resource consumption and more prepared for equipment failures. It seems like a lot to manage. It is, initially, but once you understand the systems, it becomes second nature. And there's something satisfying about knowing you can take care of yourself, regardless of what happens in the outside world. Emma began to understand that Marcus's mountain sanctuary represented more than just physical isolation. It was a carefully constructed environment designed to provide security and self-sufficiency that couldn't be taken away by other people's decisions or failures. The drive to Glacier Falls that afternoon revealed more about both Marcus and the community he had chosen to live near. The town was small but prosperous, with well-maintained buildings and the kind of comfortable atmosphere that suggested people looked out for each other. Dr. Sarah Martinez's clinic was located in a converted house on the town's main street, with modern medical equipment housed in rooms that retained the warmth and character of a family home. Dr. Martinez herself was a woman in her 40s with competent hands and the direct manner of someone accustomed to dealing with all kinds of medical emergencies. "Marcus Stone," she said warmly as they entered the clinic. "What brings you to town? Please don't tell me you've injured yourself working on some dangerous project again." "Not this time. Dr. Martinez, I'd like you to meet Emma Claire. She's staying at my place and needs prenatal care." Dr. Martinez's expression shifted to professional assessment as she looked at Emma, taking in her obvious pregnancy and the signs of stress and poor nutrition that were still visible despite one night of good rest and proper food. "How far along are you, dear?" "About 6 months. When was your last prenatal visit?" Emma felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. 6 weeks ago, maybe 7. I lost my insurance and couldn't afford to continue care." "Well, we'll get you caught up today and make sure everything is progressing normally." The examination that followed was thorough but gentle, with Dr. Martinez explaining each step and reassuring Emma about what she was finding. The baby's heartbeat was strong and regular, the growth measurements were appropriate for the gestational age, and there were no immediate concerns about Emma's health, despite the recent stress and poor nutrition. "Everything looks good, Doctor," Martinez announced as they concluded the exam. "The baby is developing normally, and your blood pressure and other vital signs are within healthy ranges. We'll want to schedule regular visits from now until delivery, and we should discuss your plans for where you want to give birth." "I hadn't really thought about that yet," Emma admitted. "The hospital in Kalispell has an excellent maternity ward, about an hour's drive from Marcus's place. We could also arrange for a midwife if you prefer a more natural approach to delivery." As they left the clinic, Emma felt lighter than she had in weeks. Confirmation that her baby was healthy and developing normally removed one of the major sources of anxiety that had been consuming her mental energy. More importantly, she now had medical support and a plan for continuing care throughout the remainder of her pregnancy. "Thank you," she said to Marcus as they drove back toward the mountains. "I can't remember the last time someone went out of their way to help me without wanting something in return." "Maybe that says more about the people you've been around than it does about you." That evening, as they prepared dinner together in Marcus's well-equipped kitchen, Emma found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't experienced in months. The conversation flowed naturally as they worked, covering topics from books they had both read to their opinions on various political and social issues. Marcus proved to be both well-informed and thoughtful, with perspectives shaped by his military service and his chosen isolation. Emma discovered that her own views had been influenced more by her recent experiences with betrayal and abandonment than by careful consideration of complex issues. "I used to think people were basically good," she said as they sat down to eat. The meal they had prepared together, recent experiences, have made me more cynical about human nature. "People are complicated," Marcus replied, "capable of both tremendous kindness and shocking cruelty, sometimes within the same day. The key is learning to recognize which tendency you're dealing with in any given situation." "How do you tell the difference?" "Pay attention to actions rather than words. Watch how people treat those who can't benefit them. Notice whether their behavior is consistent over time or changes based on what they need from you. Emma realized that Marcus was describing exactly the analysis she had unconsciously performed when deciding whether to trust him. His actions had been consistently helpful without any apparent expectation of immediate benefit to himself. As they cleaned up after dinner, Emma felt a contentment she hadn't experienced since early in her pregnancy, before conflict and uncertainty had consumed her daily existence. Working alongside Marcus in the warm kitchen, with classical music playing softly in the background, and the security of knowing she had a place to sleep and food to eat, she began to remember what it felt like to be treated with respect and consideration. "Marcus," she said as they finished the dishes, "I want you to know that this is the first time in months that I've felt like a person rather than a problem to be solved or disposed of. You were always a person, Emma. You just ended up around people who had forgotten how to see that." Later that night, as Emma settled into her comfortable bed and listened to the sounds of the Montana wilderness outside her window, she reflected on how dramatically her circumstances had changed in just 24 hours. The transformation from desperation to hope seemed almost too rapid to be real, but the evidence was undeniable. Marcus Stone had offered her more than shelter and food. He had offered her the chance to rebuild her life on her own terms, with support but without control, with assistance but without loss of autonomy. For the first time since learning she was pregnant, Emma allowed herself to imagine a future that included both motherhood and the pursuit of her own dreams and ambitions. Emma's second week at the mountain cabin established a routine that felt more natural than anything she had experienced in months. She woke each morning to the sound of Marcus moving quietly around the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the methodical efficiency of someone who had learned to find satisfaction in daily tasks. By the time she emerged from her room, coffee would be ready, and he would be starting whatever meal he had planned for the day. Their conversations over breakfast became the foundation of a growing friendship. Marcus proved to be an engaging companion, well-read and thoughtful, with perspectives shaped by experiences far different from her own. He asked questions about her thoughts on various topics, treating her opinions with respect, even when they differed from his own views. "What do you miss most about your life before everything changed?" Marcus asked one morning, as they shared pancakes he had made from scratch, using flour he ground himself from wheat he ordered in bulk. Emma considered the question while savoring food that was better than anything she had eaten in restaurants. "Having plans that extended beyond next week. Before I got pregnant, I used to think about what I wanted to accomplish in the next 5 years. Now I can barely imagine what next month will look like. What were those 5-year plans? Finishing college, starting my teaching career, maybe travel if I could save enough money? Simple things, but they gave me direction and purpose." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Pregnancy doesn't have to end those plans. It might change the timeline or the methods, but it doesn't have to eliminate the goals entirely. It feels like it does when you're facing it alone, but you're not facing it alone anymore." The simple statement carried implications that Emma wasn't sure how to interpret. Marcus had been careful to avoid making commitments that extended beyond the immediate future, but his comment suggested he was thinking about longer-term arrangements. During her second week, Emma began contributing to the daily work of maintaining the property. She took over care of the chickens and goats, finding satisfaction in the routine of feeding and tending to animals that depended on her attention. The chickens, in particular, seemed to respond to her gentle approach, and egg production increased noticeably under her care. "You have a gift with animals," Marcus observed as they watched the goats following Emma around their pen like devoted pets. "They trust you immediately." "I grew up around animals. My grandfather had a small farm in Ohio, where I spent summers helping with livestock and crops. What happened to the farm? Sold after my grandfather died. My parents weren't interested in agricultural life, and nobody else in the family wanted to take it on. Emma felt the familiar pang of loss that accompanied thoughts of her grandfather's farm. It had been her favorite place in the world, where she had felt most herself and most connected to something meaningful. The memory of those summers had sustained her through difficult periods, but now seemed like scenes from someone else's life. Marcus seemed to sense her emotional shift. "Tell me about those summers. What did you love most about farm life?" For the next hour, as they worked together in Marcus's garden, harvesting late vegetables for winter storage, Emma found herself describing the rhythms of agricultural life that had shaped her understanding of hard work and self-sufficiency. The planting and tending and harvesting that connected human effort to natural cycles in ways that felt both practical and spiritual. "I used to think I'd go back someday," she said, as they loaded baskets with potatoes that would be stored in Marcus's root cellar. "Maybe buy a small place where I could teach part-time and farm part-time. It seemed like the perfect combination of meaningful work." "Why couldn't you still do that?" Emma gestured to her pregnant belly. "Single motherhood and farming don't exactly go together. Both require more time and energy than one person has." "What if you weren't single?" The question hung in the air between them as they carried the vegetables toward the storage building. Emma wasn't sure how to interpret Marcus's meaning. Was he asking hypothetically about her future prospects, or was he suggesting something more immediate and personal? "I'm not sure I understand what you're asking." Marcus set down his basket of potatoes and turned to face her directly. "Emma, I've been thinking about your situation and my own circumstances, and I have a proposal that might benefit both of us." Emma's stomach tightened with apprehension. After 2 weeks of respectful treatment and careful boundaries, she had begun to trust that Marcus's motives were genuinely altruistic. If he was about to reveal hidden expectations or demands, the betrayal would be devastating. What kind of proposal? Marriage. The word hit Emma like a physical blow. She set down her own basket and stared at Marcus, certain she had misunderstood. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "I'm proposing that we get married, not for romantic reasons, but as a practical arrangement that would solve problems for both of us." Emma's mind reeled as she tried to process what Marcus was suggesting. Marriage was supposed to be the culmination of love and commitment, not a business transaction between people who barely knew each other. "Marcus, we've known each other for 2 weeks. That's hardly enough time to decide whether we can live together comfortably, much less whether we should make a lifetime commitment." "You're right about the timeline," Marcus agreed. "But I'm not talking about a traditional marriage based on romantic love. I'm talking about a partnership based on mutual benefit and respect." "What kind of mutual benefit?" Marcus gestured toward the property around them, the carefully maintained buildings and productive land that represented years of solitary labor. "I've built something here that's designed for a family, but I've been living in it alone. You need security and support during your pregnancy and beyond. We could combine resources and create something better than either of us could manage separately." Emma walked toward the root cellar, needing movement to help her process the magnitude of what Marcus was suggesting. "This is insane. People don't get married for practical reasons anymore, don't they? How many marriages fail because people ignore practical compatibility in favor of romantic feelings that fade over time?" Marcus followed her but maintained a respectful distance. "What I'm proposing is building a partnership on solid foundations that might grow into something deeper if we're compatible. And if we're not compatible, then we handle it like reasonable adults and find solutions that work for both of us. I'm not trying to trap you, Emma. I'm trying to offer you choices and security that you wouldn't have otherwise." Emma opened the root cellar door and descended into the cool, earth-scented space where Marcus stored vegetables, preserved foods, and other supplies. The shelves were organized with military precision, containing enough food to sustain several people through a harsh Montana winter. Here was evidence of planning and foresight that extended far beyond his own immediate needs. "You've been preparing for this, haven't you?" she said, emerging from the cellar to face Marcus directly. "The cradle in your workshop, the medical arrangement with Dr. Martinez, the way this place is set up to support a family. Meeting me at the truck stop wasn't accidental." Marcus's expression grew serious. "Meeting you was completely accidental. But you're right that I've been preparing for the possibility of not living alone forever." "Why?" "Because 3 years of isolation taught me that human beings aren't meant to live entirely cut off from meaningful relationships. I thought I needed solitude to heal from what happened in the army, but what I really needed was the chance to build something positive, with someone who understood what it meant to start over." Marcus leaned against the fence that surrounded his garden, his gaze focused on the mountains that rose beyond his property. "Emma, I'm not asking you to love me or pretend to be something you're not. I'm asking you to consider whether we might be able to help each other create lives that are better than what either of us could build alone. What would such a marriage actually look like? Partnership in every sense of the word, shared decision-making about everything that affects both of us, combined resources and efforts toward common goals, mutual support through difficulties, and celebration of successes." Marcus turned back to face her. "You would have complete autonomy over your own life and choices. I'm not looking for a wife who would be subservient to my wishes, but a partner who would bring her own strengths and perspectives to our shared enterprise. And the baby would be our child, legally and practically. I would take full responsibility for supporting and raising him or her, regardless of biological parentage." The generosity of this offer took Emma's breath away. Marcus was proposing to provide her child with a father's love and support without any biological obligation to do so. In a world where the actual father had abandoned them both for the price of a truck stop phone call, such commitment from a virtual stranger seemed almost impossible to believe. Why would you take on that responsibility? Because children deserve stability and love, regardless of the circumstances of their conception. Because I've always wanted to be a father, but haven't found the right situation until now. And because raising a child would give both of us a purpose larger than ourselves. Emma found herself considering the practical implications of Marcus's proposal. Marriage would provide legal security for both herself and her baby. It would give her access to health care and other benefits that she couldn't obtain on her own. More importantly, it would mean her child would grow up with a father figure who had chosen to accept that role rather than being forced into it by circumstance. "What about physical intimacy?" Emma asked, her cheeks burning with embarrassment, but needing to understand all aspects of what Marcus was proposing. "Whatever develops naturally between us, if anything. I'm not going to pressure you for physical relationship you're not ready for or interested in. The marriage would be real, in every legal and practical sense, but the personal aspects would develop at whatever pace feels right for both of us." Marcus's answer eliminated Emma's primary concern about his motives. A man whose primary interest was sexual would not have offered such patient and respectful terms. "This is a lot to consider," Emma said finally. "I know, and I don't need an answer immediately. Take whatever time you need to think it through. What if I decide against it? Would I still be welcome to stay here until I figure out other arrangements?" "Absolutely. My offer of help doesn't depend on your answer to the marriage proposal. Those are separate things entirely." That evening, Emma called Dr. Martinez from Marcus's landline to ask questions about her medical options as a single mother versus a married woman. The differences were stark. Marriage to Marcus would provide health insurance that would cover both prenatal care and delivery costs. It would also ensure that her child had access to quality health care from birth through adulthood. "Is this about Marcus's proposal?" Dr. Martinez asked directly. Because if it is, I should tell you that he discussed it with me before mentioning it to you. He did? He wanted to make sure I thought he was mentally and emotionally prepared for the responsibilities he was considering taking on. I told him that in my professional opinion, he would make an excellent husband and father for someone who appreciated his particular qualities. What qualities would those be? Reliability, integrity, genuine care for other people's well-being, and the kind of quiet strength that doesn't need to prove itself through dominance or control. After ending the call, Emma walked out onto the cabin's front porch, where Marcus was sitting in one of 2 rocking chairs he had built himself. The night air was crisp with the promise of winter, and stars were visible in incredible abundance without competition from city lights. Dr. Martinez says you discussed your proposal with her before mentioning it to me. I wanted to make sure I wasn't acting impulsively or making promises I couldn't keep. Marriage, even unconventional marriage, affects more than just the 2 people involved. Emma settled into the second rocking chair, noting how comfortable and well-crafted it was. What did she tell you? That I needed to be honest with myself about my motivations and realistic about the challenges. She also said that if I was going to propose marriage to solve practical problems, I had better be prepared to make it a real partnership rather than a charity arrangement. And are you prepared for that? Marcus was quiet for several minutes. The only sounds the gentle creaking of their rocking chairs and the distant call of an owl in the forest. I think so. But I've never been married before, so I'm not entirely sure what I don't know. His honesty was refreshing after months of Brandon's confident assertions about things he clearly didn't understand. Marcus's willingness to admit uncertainty suggested maturity and self-awareness that boded well for any kind of partnership. I've never been married either, Emma said, and I certainly never imagined that my first proposal would come from someone I met at a truck stop. Life rarely unfolds the way we expect it to. Emma rocked gently in her chair, her hands resting on her growing belly where the baby was moving with increasing frequency. If I said yes, when would this marriage take place? Whenever you felt ready, tomorrow, next month after the baby is born. The timing would be entirely up to you. And where would we live? Here, unless you preferred somewhere else. I built this place to last, and I think it would be a good environment for raising a child. Emma had to admit that the mountain property offered advantages for family life that were difficult to find elsewhere. Clean air, space to grow and explore, safety from the urban dangers that seemed to threaten children with increasing frequency. A child raised here would learn self-sufficiency and connection to the natural world that could serve them well throughout life. What about your book project? Would marriage and a family interfere with your writing plans? I think it might enhance them. Having a family would give me more motivation to complete the book and share what I've learned about independent living. Marcus stopped rocking and turned to face her more directly. Emma, I should tell you something else about my motivations for this proposal. Emma's pulse quickened, wondering if Marcus was about to reveal the hidden agenda she had been watching. 4. What's that? I think you're remarkable, not just attractive, though you are that, but genuinely impressive as a person. The way you've handled an impossible situation with dignity, the way you care for the animals, the intelligence you bring to our conversations about everything from literature to politics. Marcus paused, seeming to struggle with expressing thoughts. He wasn't accustomed to sharing. I've been alone for 3 years, convincing myself that isolation was what I needed. But watching you these past 2 weeks has made me realize that what I really needed was the chance to care about someone again. Emma felt her breath catch. Marcus wasn't just proposing a practical arrangement. He was admitting to genuine feelings that had developed despite the short time they had known each other. I'm 6 months pregnant with another man's child. She said, testing whether his attraction could survive the reality of her circumstances. And that child will be lucky to have you as a mother. The man who abandoned you both is an idiot who gave up something precious because he was too immature to recognize its value. The conviction in Marcus's voice made Emma's eyes fill with tears. For months, she had been carrying the weight of Brandon's rejection, wondering if there was something fundamentally wrong with her that made her unworthy of love and commitment. Marcus was suggesting that the fault lay entirely with Brandon's character rather than with any deficiency in her own. "Marcus, I need to be honest with you about something." "What's that?" "I'm not sure I'm capable of love right now. The pregnancy, the abandonment, losing my family's support. I feel like I've been emotionally shut down just to survive. I don't know if I have anything to offer a partner beyond basic companionship." Marcus nodded, as if he had expected this confession. "I understand that feeling. When I came back from my last deployment, I thought my capacity for connection had been permanently damaged. It took time and the right circumstances for me to start feeling human again." "How long did that take?" "About 2 years of living here, before I stopped feeling like a ghost walking through the motions of life. Another year before I started believing I might have something worthwhile to offer another person." Emma rocked quietly, processing the idea that her current emotional numbness might be temporary rather than permanent. "What if it doesn't come back? What if I'm never able to feel the way I used to?" "Then we build our partnership on the feelings we do have. Respect, friendship, shared goals, mutual care. Love comes in many forms, Emma. Passionate romance is just one variety, and not necessarily the most important for a lasting marriage." As her third week at the cabin began, Emma found herself paying closer attention to the details of Marcus's character and daily habits. She watched how he treated his animals with patient kindness, never losing his temper even when the goats escaped their pen or the chickens scattered feed everywhere. She observed his interactions with the few visitors who occasionally came to the property, noting his courtesy toward everyone regardless of their social status or what they might be able to do for him. The mailman, an elderly gentleman named Frank Morrison, he clearly respected Marcus and enjoyed their brief conversations during weekly deliveries. Dr. Martinez stopped by one afternoon to check on Emma and stayed for coffee, her comfortable familiarity with Marcus suggesting a friendship built over on time through shared experiences. "Marcus helped me set up the medical clinic when I first moved to Glacier Falls," Dr. Martinez explained to Emma as they sat on the front porch, enjoying the October sunshine. "He volunteered his construction skills and refused to accept payment, saying that having a good doctor in the area benefited everyone." "That sounds like something he would do. He's one of the most genuinely selfless people I've ever met. Also, one of the most isolated, until recently." Dr. Martinez studied Emma with the perceptive gaze of someone trained to read both physical and emotional health. "You've been good for him. I haven't seen him this engaged with life since he moved here. We've become friends. I can see that. But I think it's more than friendship, at least from his perspective." That evening, Emma decided to address Marcus's marriage proposal directly rather than continuing to avoid the topic. She found him in his workshop, putting finishing touches on the wooden cradle she had admired during her first tour of the property. "Is that for my baby?" she asked, running her hand over the smooth wood that had been sanded to satin perfection. "If you want it to be. If not, I'll save it for whenever it might be needed." Emma studied the cradle's construction, noting the careful attention to both safety and beauty. The joints were perfectly fitted, the wood chosen for both durability and attractive grain. It was the work of someone who took pride in creating things that would last for generations. "Marcus, about your marriage proposal." He looked up from his work, his expression attentive but not pressuring. "What about it? I need to understand what you would expect from me as a wife, beyond what you've already mentioned." Marcus set down his sandpaper and gave her his full attention. Honesty in our communications, loyalty to our partnership, though not necessarily romantic exclusivity, if that becomes an issue later. Shared responsibility for major decisions that affect our life together. What about children beyond this baby? Only if you wanted more children. I'd be honored to have a large family, but that would be entirely your choice. Emma appreciated that he left the decision about future children entirely in her hands, recognizing that her body and health would bear the primary burden of any additional pregnancies. What about your military background? Do you have any psychological issues that might affect a marriage or family life? Marcus's expression grew serious. I have PTSD that's mostly under control through therapy and medication. I have occasional nightmares and periods of hypervigilance, but nothing that interferes with daily functioning or makes me dangerous to be around. Therapy and medication. I drive to Kalispell once a month to see a psychiatrist who specializes in veteran issues. I take medication for anxiety and depression that keeps me stable and functional. Emma appreciated his openness about mental health challenges that many men would have tried to hide or minimize. His willingness to seek professional help and maintain treatment suggested responsibility and self-awareness. Marcus, if we got married, would you expect me to take your name? That would be your choice entirely. Some women prefer to keep their family name, and I'd understand that decision. Actually, I think I'd like to take your name. Emma Stone has a nice sound to it, and it would give me and the baby a fresh start. Marcus smiled at her comment about the name, then grew serious again. Emma, there's something else you should know before you make any decisions about my proposal. Emma's pulse quickened, wondering what revelation might be coming. What's that? I inherited this property from my uncle, along with a significant amount of money that I've invested conservatively. We wouldn't just be comfortable, we would be genuinely wealthy by most standards. How wealthy? Wealthy enough that you could attend any university you wanted without worrying about tuition or living expenses. Wealthy enough that our children could have the best education and opportunities available. Wealthy enough that we could travel, invest in businesses, or pursue any goals that interested us. This information reframed everything about Marcus's proposal. He wasn't just offering her security. He was offering her access to opportunities she had never imagined possible. The college education that had seemed permanently out of reach could become reality. Her dreams of teaching and farming could be pursued without the financial pressures that made them seem impractical. Why didn't you mention this before? Because I wanted you to get to know me as a person rather than as a bank account. Too many relationships fail when they're built on financial considerations rather than genuine compatibility. Emma understood his reasoning, but the knowledge of his wealth raised new questions about his motivations. Marcus, you could marry anyone you wanted. Beautiful women, educated women, women without complicated histories. Why are you choosing someone like me? Marcus moved closer, his amber eyes intense with sincerity. Because most women would see my money and my property and try to become what they thought I wanted them to be. You see me as a person first, and you're not trying to change yourself to fit some idea of what I might prefer. But I'm pregnant with another man's child. That's not exactly the ideal situation for most men. It's the perfect situation for me. I get the chance to be a father without the genetic complications that might come from my own military service and medication history. I get to raise a child who will know from birth that love and family are choices we make rather than accidents of biology. The way Marcus spoke about her unborn child with genuine enthusiasm rather than resigned acceptance moved Emma more than she had expected. Brandon had treated the pregnancy like a disease that had infected their relationship. Marcus spoke about the baby as if it were a gift he was honored to receive. "If I said yes," Emma said slowly, "when would you want to have the wedding?" "As soon as possible, if you're comfortable with that. The sooner we're legally married, the sooner you and the baby have complete security and access to all the benefits that come with being my wife." "What kind of wedding?" "Whatever you want. Simple courthouse ceremony, church wedding, something here at the property with just a few close friends. The important thing is the commitment, not the celebration." Emma looked around the property that had become her refuge, imagining it as her permanent home. The cabin could be expanded to accommodate a growing family. The land could support larger gardens and more livestock. The isolation that had once seemed threatening now felt like protection from a world that had proven itself capable of casual cruelty. "Marcus, if I agree to marry you, I want to be clear about one thing." "What's that?" "I want this to be a real partnership, not a rescue operation where I'm permanently grateful for your charity. I want to contribute something meaningful to our life together." "What did you have in mind?" "I want to be involved in developing this property, in your writing project, in any business decisions that affect our family. I want to be an equal partner, not a dependent." Marcus's smile was the brightest Emma had seen from him. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." As they stood together in the workshop, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects that represented Marcus's vision for their future, Emma realized that his proposal offered her something she had never expected to find: the chance to be valued, not despite her circumstances, but because of the strength and character she had demonstrated in surviving them. The girl who had been abandoned for $1 was being offered the opportunity to become a partner in building something extraordinary. Emma spent her 4th week at the cabin, conducting what she privately called her investigation of Marcus Stone. His marriage proposal had forced her to examine not just her immediate needs, but the kind of life she wanted to build for herself and her unborn child. If she was going to commit to a partnership with this man, she needed to understand exactly who he was beneath the surface: kindness and respectful behavior. Her first discovery came through his library. While Marcus worked on ranch maintenance, Emma explored his book collection with the curiosity of someone who had always believed that reading choices revealed character. The shelves contained an eclectic mix that surprised her: military histories alongside poetry collections, practical manuals on sustainable living next to classic literature, psychology texts beside volumes on organic farming. What struck her most was the marginalia. Marcus had filled the margins of many books with careful notes, questions, and observations that revealed an active, questioning mind. His comments on a book about PTSD treatment showed someone seriously engaged with understanding and managing his own mental health. Notes in a volume about child development suggested he had been thinking about fatherhood long before meeting her. "You're quite the scholar," Emma commented that evening as they prepared dinner together, a routine that had become natural and comfortable. "Reading helps me think through problems and understand different perspectives. Army life doesn't leave much time for intellectual exploration, so I've been catching up." Emma noticed that Marcus deflected compliments about his intelligence, the same way he downplayed his generosity. "What's the most important thing you've learned from all this reading?" Marcus considered the question while stirring a pot of soup that smelled better than anything Emma remembered from her childhood. "That most human problems stem from people not understanding themselves or each other well enough to make good decisions." "Is that why you proposed marriage to someone you've known for 3 weeks?" "Partly, but also because I've learned to recognize character quickly through observation, rather than relying on time alone to reveal someone's nature." Emma had been conducting her own character assessment, watching for signs of the controlling or manipulative. behavior that might be hidden beneath Marcus's respectful facade. Instead, she found consistency between his words and actions that was remarkable in her experience with men. When she expressed interest in reorganizing his pantry for better efficiency, he handed over complete control without micromanaging her decisions. When she suggested changes to the garden layout for next year's planting, he listened carefully and incorporated her ideas into his planning. When she needed privacy for a difficult phone call with her former roommate in Billings, he made himself scarce without asking questions about the conversation's content. The phone call itself provided another test of Marcus's character. Emma's former roommate, Jessica, had called to inform her that Brandon was spreading stories around Billings about Emma's instability and gold-digging behavior. According to Jessica, Brandon was telling anyone who would listen that Emma had gotten pregnant deliberately to trap him into marriage and financial support. "He's saying you threatened to kill yourself if he didn't marry you," Jessica reported with obvious disgust, "and that you stole money from his wallet before he finally had to cut ties for his own safety." Emma felt sick listening to Brandon's lies, understanding that he was trying to rewrite their relationship's history to cast himself as the victim rather than the abandoner. When she hung up the phone, she found Marcus waiting in the kitchen with hot tea and a concerned expression. "Bad news?" Emma told him about Brandon's campaign of character assassination, watching Marcus's face for signs that the accusations might make him reconsider his proposal. Instead, his expression grew coldly angry in a way that reminded her of his military background. People who abandon pregnant women tend to invent elaborate justifications for their behavior, Marcus said quietly. The more dramatic the lies, the more guilt they're trying to escape. Aren't you concerned that some of what he's saying might be true? I've been living with you for 3 weeks, Emma. I've observed your character under stress, watched how you handle disappointment and uncertainty. Brandon's version of events doesn't match the woman I've come to know. The unwavering confidence in Marcus's voice helped Emma realize how completely his opinion of her had become independent of others' judgments. For the first time in months, she felt valued for who she actually was, rather than dismissed based on assumptions about her situation. Emma's investigation of Marcus's character extended to his interactions with the broader community. When they drove to Glacier Falls for her prenatal appointment, she watched how he engaged with various townspeople. They encountered. The hardware store owner sought his advice about a construction project. The bank manager greeted him warmly and asked about his book project. Even the teenagers working at the gas station treated him with unusual respect for someone of his age. "You're well-liked here," Emma observed as they left the post office where Marcus had mailed packages containing chapters of his manuscript to potential publishers. "Small towns appreciate people who contribute more than they take. I've tried to be useful, whenever possible. What kind of contributions? Construction work for people who can't afford professional contractors. Equipment repair for folks who don't have the technical skills. Emergency medical care when Dr. Martinez isn't available." Marcus helped Emma into his truck with the careful attention to her comfort that had become habitual. "I've learned that being part of a community means accepting responsibility for others' well-being, not just focusing on your own needs." Dr. Martinez's examination confirmed that Emma's pregnancy was progressing normally, but she also made observations that surprised Emma. "Your stress levels are significantly lower than they were 3 weeks ago," the doctor noted. "Your blood pressure is better and you've gained healthy weight. Whatever changes you've made in your living situation are benefiting both you and the baby." After the appointment, Marcus suggested they have lunch at Glacier Falls Small Cafe, giving Emma her first opportunity to observe him in a social setting with people who knew him well. The cafe owner, an elderly woman named Ruth Hendricks, clearly adored Marcus and fussed over both of them with the affection of a grandmother. "It's about time you brought a young lady to meet us," Ruth told Marcus while serving them homemade pie that rivaled anything Emma had ever tasted. This hermit routine was getting ridiculous for a man your age. "Ruth thinks everyone should be married," Marcus explained to Emma with obvious affection for the older woman. "Ruth thinks everyone should be happy," the cafe owner corrected, "and happiness usually requires sharing your life with someone who appreciates what you have to offer." Emma found herself studying the interaction between Marcus and Ruth, noting the easy warmth that suggested a relationship built over time through repeated positive experiences. Ruth clearly saw Marcus as family rather than just a customer, and her approval of Emma felt significant. "Ruth," Emma said impulsively, "what's your honest opinion of Marcus as a potential husband?" The older woman's eyes lit up with delighted surprise at the direct question. "Honey, if I were 40 years younger, I'd marry him myself. He's got everything a woman could want: integrity, kindness, the ability to provide for a family, and enough sense to treat a wife as a partner rather than a possession. Any drawbacks I should know about?" Ruth pretended to consider this seriously. "He's too generous for his own good sometimes, and he thinks too much instead of trusting his instincts. But those are the kinds of problems most women would be grateful to have." The drive back to the cabin gave Emma time to process the day's observations. Every interaction had reinforced her growing understanding of Marcus as someone who commanded genuine respect and affection from people who knew him well. His integration into the Glacier Falls community suggested stability and commitment rather than the transient lifestyle of someone with something to hide. That evening, Emma made her decision. "Marcus," she said, as they sat on the front porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, "I want to accept your proposal." He turned to look at her, his expression careful and hopeful. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that you're the most honorable man I've ever met. I'm sure that marrying you would give my child the security and opportunities I could never provide alone. And I'm sure that I'd rather build a life with someone I respect and trust than continue facing the world by myself." Marcus reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they intertwined with hers. "I promise you won't regret this decision, Emma." "I know I won't. Because even if this partnership doesn't develop into romantic love, it's already given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope for the future." Emma's engagement to Marcus began with an unexpected challenge that tested both their commitment and their ability to work together under pressure. 3 days after accepting his proposal, Emma woke to find Marcus pale and shaking at the kitchen table, a letter crumpled in his fist. "What's wrong?" she asked, moving quickly to his side despite her growing belly making rapid movement difficult. "My discharge status is being reviewed," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "There's a possibility my disability benefits could be terminated and my medical care suspended." Emma had never seen Marcus anything but calm and controlled. The fear in his eyes revealed how much his veteran benefits meant to his sense of security and stability. "What would that mean for us?" "It means we might not be as financially secure as I led you to believe. My savings would cover us for a while, but without the monthly disability payments, we'd need to find other income sources sooner than planned." Emma sat beside him, her mind racing through the implications. "How likely is it that your benefits will actually be terminated?" "I don't know. The letter is vague about the reasons for the review, but these things can go either way, depending on bureaucratic decisions that have nothing to do with actual need." Marcus looked at Emma with something approaching desperation. "I understand. If this changes your decision about marrying me, I should have mentioned that my financial situation could be affected by government decisions outside my control." Emma studied his face, seeing vulnerability that he rarely allowed to show. "Marcus, do you think I accepted your proposal just because of money?" I don't know. Financial security is important when you're pregnant and alone. It is important. But it's not the most important thing. Emma reached for Marcus's hand, finding it cold and trembling slightly. The most important thing is that you've treated me with more respect and kindness in 3 weeks than most people have shown me in my entire life. Government benefits don't change that, but they change our practical circumstances significantly. Then, we'll adapt to whatever circumstances we face together. Emma's response seemed to calm Marcus, but she could see that the potential loss of his veteran benefits had shaken his confidence about their future prospects. That afternoon, she suggested they drive to Kalispell to meet with his psychiatrist and get more information about the review process. Dr. Robert Chen was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had been treating Marcus for PTSD since his arrival in Montana. His office was comfortable and professional, with certificates and degrees that testified to his expertise in military mental health issues. The review is routine, Dr. Chen assured them after Marcus explained the situation. These periodic assessments are required by law, but your condition is well documented and your treatment has been consistently successful. What's the worst-case scenario? Emma asked, appreciating that the doctor included her in the conversation as Marcus's partner rather than treating her as an observer. Temporary suspension of benefits while additional evaluations are conducted. But Marcus's medical records are thorough, and I'll provide strong support for continuing his current treatment and benefit status. The relief on Marcus's face was obvious, but Emma noticed that the experience had revealed something important about their developing relationship. When faced with potential crisis, his first concern had been for how it might affect her rather than for his own welfare. During the drive back to the cabin, Emma raised a topic that had been on her mind since Marcus's morning panic. We should get married sooner rather than later. Marcus glanced at her in surprise. Because of the benefits review? Because facing that kind of uncertainty together showed me something important about how we work as a team. And because being legally married would protect both of us if bureaucratic problems arise. Are you sure you're ready for that step? I'm sure that waiting longer won't make me more certain about your character. If anything, it might make me overthink the decision. They scheduled their wedding for the following Saturday at the small church in Glacier Falls, with Dr. Martinez and Ruth Hendricks serving as witnesses. Pastor Williams, who had known Marcus since his arrival in the area, agreed to perform the ceremony despite the unconventional circumstances. I've seen enough failed marriages based on passion alone, the pastor told them during their brief premarital counseling session. Mutual respect and shared values provide a stronger foundation than romantic feelings that might fade over time. Emma's wedding dress came from an unexpected source. Ruth Hendricks arrived at the cabin 3 days before the ceremony, carrying a garment bag containing a beautiful cream-colored dress that had belonged to her daughter. Sarah wore this when she married her husband in Denver, Ruth explained as she helped Emma try on the dress. She's about your size, and she insisted that you should have something special for your wedding day. The dress fit perfectly, flowing gracefully over Emma's pregnant figure and making her feel beautiful for the first time in months. Looking at herself in Marcus's bedroom mirror, Emma could hardly recognize the desperate girl who had been abandoned at a truck stop just a month before. You look like a goddess, Marcus said from the doorway, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Beautiful and strong and radiant. Emma felt tears sting her eyes at the compliment. Brandon had made increasingly critical comments about her appearance as her pregnancy progressed, making her feel unattractive and unwanted. Marcus's obvious appreciation for how she looked reminded her that pregnancy could be beautiful rather than shameful. The wedding morning arrived with perfect October weather, crisp and clear with golden aspen leaves, creating a spectacular backdrop. For the ceremony, Emma woke with nervous excitement rather than the dread she had expected to feel about making such a momentous commitment to someone she had known for only a month. Marcus appeared at breakfast, wearing a dark suit that emphasized his tall frame and made his amber eyes appear even more striking. He had clearly taken care with his appearance, but his nervous energy was obvious as he fumbled with coffee cups and dropped his fork twice during the meal. "Having second thoughts?" Emma asked gently. "No second thoughts about marrying you. Just normal anxiety about whether I'll be a good husband and father. I think the fact that you're worried about it is probably a good sign. Bad husbands don't generally spend time concerned about their performance. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. Pastor Williams spoke about marriage as partnership and commitment, rather than focusing solely on romantic love. Marcus's vows, which he had written himself, promised to honor Emma's autonomy while providing unwavering support for her dreams and goals. Emma's vows surprised even herself with their emotional intensity. Standing in the small church surrounded by the few people who had become important to both of them, she found herself speaking from the heart about gratitude, hope, and the unexpected ways that life could transform disaster into opportunity. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed Emma with gentle reverence that made her feel cherished rather than claimed. The kiss was brief and respectful, but it carried promises about patience and care that meant more to Emma than passionate declarations might have. The reception was held at Ruth's Cafe, which she had closed to regular customers for the afternoon. Dr. Martinez brought a cake she had ordered from Kalispell, and several other townspeople stopped by to offer congratulations and welcome Emma to the community. "You're part of Glacier Falls now," Ruth told Emma as the afternoon drew to a close, "and that means you're family to all of us." As Emma and Marcus drove back to their mountain home as husband and wife, Emma reflected on how completely her life had changed in just 4 weeks. The girl who had been abandoned for $1 had become Mrs. Marcus Stone, partner in a prosperous ranch and member of a caring community. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked as they turned onto the dirt road that led to their cabin. "Only that I waited so long to say yes." Emma's honeymoon period as Mrs. Marcus Stone lasted exactly 11 days before the outside world intruded on their mountain sanctuary. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin, enjoying the crisp November morning and the simple satisfaction of domestic tasks, when a black sedan with government plates pulled into their yard. 2 men in dark suits emerged from the car, their posture and bearing immediately recognizable to Marcus, who appeared from the workshop with tension radiating from every muscle. Emma had never seen him move with such predatory alertness, and she instinctively placed her hand on her belly protectively. "Mr. Stone," the older of the 2 men called out, flashing a badge. "Agent Reynolds, Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you about some concerns that have been brought to our attention." Marcus positioned himself between the agents and Emma, his military training evident in the way he assessed potential threats while maintaining a calm exterior. "What kind of concerns?" "Concerns about the welfare of a minor in your custody," Agent Reynolds replied, his gaze shifting to Emma with bureaucratic coldness. "We've received reports that you're harboring a pregnant teenager who may be in an unsafe situation." Emma felt her world tilting dangerously. At 19, she was legally an adult, but her youthful appearance and pregnant condition could easily lead to misunderstandings about her age and circumstances. "I'm not a minor," Emma said firmly, stepping out from behind Marcus despite his protective positioning. "I'm 19 years old and legally married to Mr. Stone." Agent Reynolds consulted a folder he carried, his expression skeptical. According to our information, Emma Claire Mitchell is 18 years old and was reported missing by her family after being abducted by an unknown subject from a truck stop in Whitefish County. That's completely false, Emma protested, but she could see that the agents were not interested in her version of events. I came here voluntarily, and I married Marcus of my own free will. Ma'am, we're going to need to verify your identity and age, and we'll need to conduct a welfare check to ensure you're not being coerced or threatened. The second agent, younger and more aggressive than Reynolds, stepped forward with handcuffs visible on his belt. Mr. Stone, we're going to need you to step away from the alleged victim while we conduct our investigation. The alleged victim is my wife, Marcus said quietly, but Emma could hear the dangerous edge creeping into his voice. And you're on private property without a warrant. We don't need a warrant for a welfare check when a minor's safety is in question. Marcus pulled out his cell phone with deliberate movements. Then you won't mind if I call my attorney to ensure everyone's rights are protected during this investigation. Agent Reynolds raised his hand in a gesture meant to be calming, but came across as condescending. That won't be necessary if everyone cooperates with our inquiry. What exactly does cooperation involve? Emma asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. You'll need to come with us for a medical examination to verify your age and ensure you haven't been harmed. Mr. Stone will need to provide documentation of his legal right to have you on his property. Emma felt the familiar panic of losing control over her own life, the same helplessness she had experienced when Brandon abandoned her and when her parents threw her out. But this time, she wasn't facing the threat alone. Agents, Marcus said with military precision, my wife will be happy to provide identification proving her age and legal status. However, she will not be leaving this property without a court order, and any medical examinations will be conducted by her own physician in my presence. Sir, you're interfering with a child welfare investigation. I'm protecting my wife's constitutional rights against unlawful detention. Emma watched Marcus transform before her eyes, from gentle partner to formidable adversary. His posture straightened, his voice carried unmistakable authority, and his entire demeanor radiated the kind of competence that made smart people reconsider their assumptions. I'm calling Dr. Martinez, Emma announced, moving toward the house. She can verify my medical records and confirm my age. The standoff in the yard lasted 2 hours, while various phone calls were made and documentation was produced. Dr. Martinez arrived with Emma's complete medical file, including birth certificate copies that proved her legal adult status. Pastor Williams came to verify the legitimacy of their marriage ceremony. Even Ruth Hendricks appeared, somehow having learned about the situation through the small-town communication network. This young woman is a valued member of our community, Ruth told the agents, with the fierce protectiveness of a grandmother defending her family. And Marcus Stone is one of the most honorable men you'll ever meet. During the investigation, Emma learned the source of the false reports. Brandon Tyler had contacted Montana Child Protective Services, claiming that his mentally unstable ex-girlfriend had been kidnapped by a dangerous veteran who was holding her against her will in an isolated mountain location. Why would your former boyfriend make such accusations? Agent Reynolds asked, as he reviewed the marriage certificate and other documentation that proved the legitimacy of Emma's situation. Because he abandoned me pregnant and penniless, and seeing me happy and secure makes him look bad, Emma replied with newfound confidence. He's trying to rewrite history to make himself the victim instead of the perpetrator. The agents eventually concluded their investigation and departed, but not before warning Marcus that any future complaints would result in more intensive scrutiny. As their sedan disappeared down the mountain road, Emma felt shaken by how quickly her new security had been threatened by lies from her past. "I'm sorry," she told Marcus as they watched the government car disappear into the distance. "I never thought Brandon would try something like this. It's not your fault. People like him often escalate their harassment when they realize their victims have found happiness elsewhere." Marcus put his arm around Emma's shoulders, the first time he had initiated physical contact since their wedding kiss. "The important thing is that we handled it together, and they found no basis for their concerns." That evening, as they debriefed, from the day's stress over dinner, Emma realized that the CPS investigation had served as an unexpected test of their marriage. Under pressure, they had functioned as a unified team, supporting each other and presenting a united front against external threats. "Marcus, I need to ask you something serious." "What's that?" "Are you prepared for the possibility that Brandon might escalate his harassment campaign? Today was just the beginning if he's determined to cause problems for us." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, apparently considering scenarios that Emma preferred not to imagine. "I've dealt with enemies before, Emma. I know how to protect what matters to me." The steel in his voice reminded Emma that her gentle, book-reading husband was also a trained soldier with combat experience. For the first time since accepting his proposal, she wondered what Marcus Stone might be capable of if truly threatened. "I don't want violence to become part of our life together." "Neither do I. But I won't let anyone hurt you or our child, whatever that requires." As they prepared for bed in their separate rooms, Emma reflected on how the day's events had changed her understanding of their marriage. What had begun as a practical arrangement was evolving into something deeper through shared adversity and mutual protection. The girl who had been abandoned for $1 now had a husband willing to face government agents and potential legal battles to defend her safety and dignity. For the first time in her adult life, Emma felt truly protected and valued. 6 months after their wedding, Emma Stone stood in the nursery Marcus had built adjacent to their bedroom, cradling their 3-week-old daughter, Grace Marie Stone. The room was bathed in morning sunlight that streamed through windows Marcus had positioned to catch the first rays of dawn, and every detail reflected the love and anticipation that had gone into its preparation. The wooden cradle Marcus had been crafting when Emma first arrived now held tiny blankets and stuffed animals. Hand-painted murals of forest animals decorated the walls, created by Emma during her final month of pregnancy when nesting instincts had driven her to make everything perfect for their baby's arrival. A comfortable rocking chair positioned near the window allowed for feeding and bonding while enjoying views of the mountain wilderness that would be Grace's playground. Grace herself was perfect, in the way that all healthy newborns are perfect. But Emma sometimes caught herself marveling at features that could have come from either parent. The baby had inherited Emma's green eyes, but Marcus's dark hair and her temperament seemed to blend Emma's quiet determination with Marcus's patient observation of the world around her. "She's awake," Marcus said softly from the doorway, his voice carrying the wonder that still overtook him whenever he looked at the daughter he had claimed as completely his own from the moment of her birth. "She's been awake for 20 minutes, just looking around and thinking baby thoughts," Emma replied, settling into the rocking chair for Grace's morning feeding. "I think she inherited your habit of careful observation before taking action." Marcus entered the nursery and perched on the window seat he had built specifically for moments like this, when they wanted to be together during Grace's care routines. His presence during feeding times had become natural and comfortable, another element of the partnership approach they had brought to every aspect of their marriage. "Any word from the publisher about your manuscript?" Emma asked as Grace settled into her feeding rhythm. "They want to meet next week to discuss publication details." Apparently, there's significant interest in practical guides for off-grid living, especially ones written by people with real experience. Marcus's book project had evolved considerably during Emma's pregnancy, transforming from a simple how-to manual into a comprehensive guide for sustainable living that included sections on everything from renewable energy systems to homeschooling children in rural environments. Emma's editing and organizational skills had helped Marcus structure his extensive knowledge into accessible chapters that could benefit readers with varying levels of experience. Will the meeting require overnight travel? 2 days in Denver. But I was thinking you and Grace might come with me. The publisher wants to discuss marketing strategies, and they mentioned interest in your perspective as a co-author. Emma looked up from Grace in surprise. Co-author. The chapters on family life, education, and community building are primarily your work. You deserve credit for your contributions. The recognition meant more to Emma than Marcus probably realized. For most of her pregnancy, she had felt like her intellectual abilities were being wasted on survival concerns. The book project had allowed her to use her education and writing skills for something meaningful, and the publisher's interest validated her belief that she had valuable insights to share. I'd love to be part of the meeting, and Grace is old. Enough for short trips now. As autumn progressed toward winter, their mountain sanctuary had become the center of an increasingly large network of relationships and responsibilities. Word about Marcus's book project had spread through the sustainable living community, and they regularly received visitors seeking advice about off-grid systems, organic farming techniques, and the practical aspects of rural self-sufficiency. Emma had taken charge of organizing these educational visits, developing structured programs that allowed them to share their knowledge while generating income that supplemented Marcus's veteran benefits and book royalties. Their weekend workshops on sustainable living had become so popular that they were booked months in advance. "You've turned our home into a business," Marcus observed one evening as they reviewed applications from people wanting to attend their winter seminar series. "Is that a problem?" "It's brilliant. I never would have thought to systematize our knowledge sharing, but you've created something that benefits everyone involved." Emma had discovered that she possessed natural talents for teaching and organizing, that she had never fully utilized before pregnancy forced her to reconsider her capabilities. Working with Marcus to develop their educational programs, she had found a way to pursue her love of teaching while building something uniquely their own. The success of their workshops had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. The University of Montana's extension program had contacted them about developing distance learning courses based on their curriculum. A major environmental organization wanted to feature their property in a documentary about sustainable living practices. Publishers were competing to offer contracts for additional books on topics ranging from homesteading with children to building resilient rural communities. "Sometimes I can't believe this is my life," Emma said one snowy December evening as they reviewed proposals from organizations that wanted to partner with them. 6 months ago, I was abandoned at a truck stop with nothing but a dollar bill. Now I'm co-authoring books and developing educational programs. 6 months ago, I was hiding in these mountains, convinced that isolation was the only way to find peace, Marcus replied, looking up from the manuscript pages he was editing. Now I can't imagine living without you and Grace. Their marriage had evolved from practical arrangement to genuine partnership through daily collaboration and shared challenges. The physical intimacy that Marcus had promised would develop naturally had indeed emerged gradually, built on emotional connection and mutual respect rather than passion alone. Emma had discovered that love could grow from friendship and admiration just as effectively as from instant attraction. More importantly, she had learned to see herself through Marcus's eyes. Where Brandon had seen burden and inconvenience, Marcus saw strength and capability. Where her parents had seen shame and failure, Marcus saw courage and resilience. Under his consistent appreciation and support, Emma had rediscovered confidence in her own worth and abilities. The transformation was evident in everything from her posture to her voice when speaking with visitors to their property. The desperate girl who had accepted charity had become a woman who commanded respect through her knowledge and competence. The abandoned pregnant teenager had evolved into a successful entrepreneur and educator who happened to also be a devoted mother, and wife Grace's christening in February brought together the extended community that had formed around Marcus and Emma's mountain homestead. Dr. Martinez served as godmother, while Pastor Williams conducted the ceremony that formally welcomed Grace into the Glacier Falls community family. Ruth Hendricks provided a celebration feast that filled their cabin with the warmth of chosen family gathering to mark important milestones. This little girl is going to grow up surrounded by people who love her, Dr. Martinez said as she held Grace during the ceremony. She'll never question her worth or her place in the world. Emma felt tears of gratitude watching her daughter being celebrated by people who had chosen to become family through affection rather than biology. Grace would grow up knowing that love was a decision people made rather than an accident of genetics, a lesson that would serve her well throughout life. That spring, Emma received an unexpected phone call that provided the final validation of the choices she had made. Jessica, her former roommate from Billings, called with news about Brandon Tyler's current circumstances. "He's been arrested for fraud," Jessica reported with obvious satisfaction. "Apparently, he's been running scams on dating websites, convincing women to send him money for fake emergencies. One of them turned out to be a police officer who set up a sting operation." Emma felt no satisfaction in Brandon's downfall, only relief that his pattern of exploiting vulnerable people had finally caught up with him. How long will he be in prison? 2 to 5 years, depending on how many victims they can identify. But Emma, there's something else you should know. He's been telling people that abandoning you was the biggest mistake of his life, that he realized too late what he had given up. Emma looked across the cabin to where Marcus was playing with Grace on a blanket near the fireplace, making funny faces that delighted their daughter and filled the room with baby laughter. The scene represented everything that mattered to her: love, security, joy, and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful with someone who truly valued her contributions. "He didn't give up anything," Emma told Jessica with quiet certainty. He revealed that he never understood what he had in the first place. After ending the call, Emma joined Marcus and Grace on the blanket, settling into the circle of warmth and contentment they had created together. Grace immediately reached for her mother with the total trust that babies show toward people who have never failed to meet their needs. "Any regrets about the path that brought you here?" Marcus asked, shifting Grace so that both her parents could hold her simultaneously. Emma considered the question while watching her daughter's face cycle through expressions of wonder and curiosity about the world she was discovering. The journey from truck stop abandonment to mountain sanctuary had been marked by fear, uncertainty, and challenges she could never have anticipated. But every difficulty had led to growth. Every crisis had revealed strength she hadn't known she possessed. "None," Emma said finally. "Every terrible thing that happened led me to this moment, to this life, to this family. I wouldn't change any of it." Marcus leaned over to kiss Emma's forehead, a gesture that had become their way of expressing affection that went beyond words. The girl who was worth only $1 turned out to be worth everything. As Grace fell asleep in the circle of her parents' arms, Emma reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had brought her from desperation to fulfillment. She had discovered that goddess-like treatment wasn't about being worshipped or placed on a pedestal, but about being valued for her true self and supported in becoming the best version of herself possible. The mountain man who had rescued her from abandonment had given her something far more precious than security or comfort. He had given her the opportunity to discover her own strength, intelligence, and capacity for building something meaningful. In teaching her to see herself as worthy of love and respect, Marcus had helped Emma become the woman she was always meant to be. Their story had begun with abandonment and betrayal, but it had become a testament to the transformative power of genuine partnership between people who chose to build each other up rather than tear each other down. The woman who had once begged for basic survival now had everything she had ever dreamed of and opportunities she had never imagined possible. Most importantly, she had learned that true love wasn't just about being chosen by someone else, but about choosing to become someone worthy of the love she received. In Marcus's eyes, Emma had always been a goddess. The journey had been about learning to see herself that way too. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.